Hi guys, hold on for a second. Before we proceed to the video, I have something very important to tell you. Professor John V. has published his new book in collaboration with Little French Media, and the title of the book is Neoliberalism, Inequality, and Authoritarianism. This book details how neoliberalism impacts the geopolitical economy in the 21st century. You can buy it from Amazon, and the link is in the description. Thank you. Now let's proceed to the video.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a brief overview about two video sessions which I did, Decline of the West, Part 1, Part 2. Obviously, those who have studied or even are vaguely familiar with decline of major powers, you know that it takes a great deal of time for decline. Um, it doesn't happen overnight unless it's a catastrophe like war, an all-out catastrophic war. The classic uh, case of decline, about which a great deal has been written, including the brilliant British scholar Edward Gibbon, The Decline and Fall of Rome. The decline of Rome starts with the death of Marcus Aurelius, and it continues into the 5th century when it finally falls with the barbarian invasions, three successive barbarian invasions. Decline is indeed a process. In the 20th century, when Europe self-destructed after a series of wars of imperialism from 1870 to 1914, which led to World War One, which they didn't call it one, they called it the Great War, because obviously, and rightly so, people did not expect another one to take place. What happened is the great scholar, German scholar Oswald Spengler, wrote a book on the decline of the West. He meant, of course, Europe. Certainly not the United States, because the U.S. was, and the U.S. is part of the West. The U.S. was actually on the ascendancy, not declining. The decline of Europe actually helped the ascendancy of the United States and the rise of Pax Americana, American peace, like compared to Pax Romana. So what we have is indeed a slow process. It took another world war, the Second World War, for Europe to be a complete basket case, and the U.S. through the Marshall Plan, as well as a series of alignments and alliances, and setting up the global management of the Western capitalist economy, because obviously there was the Soviet bloc, and after 1949, communist China. So there was that was not integrated into the Western economy. It Europe revived certainly by the late 1960s, early 1970s. Europe revived. So decline is relative. Decline is relative because there's a lot of literature right now, but the decline not just of the West, but more specifically the United States. It is true that relative to China and the BRICS group, the West is declining. Statistics bear this out. It's not a secret. It's also true that unfortunately, the conduct of the West, led by the United States, which is the leader of the West, indicated from the early Cold War with a nuclear arms race, that was managed, by the way. They managed it. I think in this respect, the Kremlin is right that actually there was better management of the early Cold War than this, in comparison with this new Cold War, which has gotten out of hand, and we may be, and one knocks on wood and hopes this doesn't happen, we may be into a nuclear war, limited nuclear war situation, which the word limited, I don't like that term. It came up in the 1980s during the Reagan administration. They were actually hoping for a limited nuclear war as long as the US stays out of it and it's just Europe and Russia that are involved. That's just reckless, utterly reckless um, policy and utterly reckless rhetoric on the part of anyone, whether it's a politician or an analyst, a journalist, an intellectual. And it doesn't matter what they think of themselves and what they think of their position with regard to the validity of their arguments. To contemplate nuclear war is reckless simply because there is imminent decline. And the decline, like I said, is relative. The decline itself can be managed. And this is one of the issues that has come up in bilateral talks between the U.S. and China, whereas China is saying let's manage the transfer of world economic center from the West to the Far East, named especially China, obviously, which is the world's largest economy measured in purchasing power parity, PPP terms, rather than nominal value. So this is the decline of the West is not just the decline in terms of its GDP versus BRICS, China and BRICS. It's not just that. Let me point out, I take a much broader perspective. I see the decline of the West across the board, institutionally, in the public sector, whether it's political institutions, the judicial system, or the private sector, by the way, where there is massive concentration of capital under the neoliberal model in the last 45 years or so. And that has created socioeconomic instability, considering that neoliberalism has also entailed um, class warfare, which, by the way, as to his credit, the billionaire Warren Buffett, none other than Warren Buffett, the darling of Wall Street, has stated that indeed, yes, it's us, it's the billionaire class, it's the capitalist class that has declared war on the working class. He is right. Many There are a number of enlightened individuals, regardless of whether they're capitalists or not, and honest enough to tell the truth, which is and not try to lie to the public or lie to themselves. Many of them actually believe that some of the hyperbole and the populist rhetoric that they utter. And it's regrettable trying to deceive the public while they actually uh, are delusional themselves. If they think that there are military solutions, given that there are nuclear powers around on the other side, the so called rivals or axis of evil, who possess more nuclear weapons than the West, okay? Um, Decline can be managed. Decline can be managed. It doesn't have to be a catastrophe for society. Europe destroyed itself in two world wars, and yet here it is. It's still, yes, it's got problems. It's declining again, but it brought it on itself. It's no one's fault but the elites of each society that bring about decline. Some worker working out in the farms, or a dock worker or a factory worker, is not responsible for any decline. It's the elites that are responsible for policy, who make policy. They are responsible for the decline. um, their influence in public policy, domestic and foreign policy, is what brings about the decline. I invite you to take a look at these two videos, part one and part two, on the decline of the West. There's a lot of material there analyzing various aspects of the decline from a historical perspective. I'm a historian and political economist, so take a look at it. I invite you to write comment, ask questions. And by all means, join this educational channel that Asad Alim, my good friend, manages, and please follow everything Assad does on this channel. Thank you for watching.